Last night, Kyiv shook under one of the deadliest Russian attacks of the war. Missiles and hundreds of drones tore through the city, killing civilians and leaving dozens injured. But Ukraine struck back instantly, launching a massive drone assault deep inside Russian territory, hitting critical military infrastructure, including the Kyiv aircraft company. And while missiles flew, diplomats raced against time in Geneva, the US pushing a peace plan, Europe offering a counter-proposal, and the Kremlin rejecting it outright. This isn't just a war on the battlefield. It's a war of diplomacy, power, and global influence, and the stakes have never been higher. The night of November 25, 2025, turned into a terrifying ordeal for Kyiv and much of Ukraine. Russian forces launched one of the largest overnight attacks since the full-scale invasion began, targeting not only military installations, but also residential neighborhoods. At least 7 civilians were killed and 20 others injured as missile and drone strikes tore through the capital. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko described the onslaught as a massive combined attack on energy and residential infrastructure, leaving thousands without power and water across multiple districts. But Ukraine struck back almost immediately. Overnight, Ukrainian drones targeted Russian regions of Rostov Oblast and Krasnodar Krai, demonstrating the country's growing long-range strike capability. The Kyiv aircraft company in Taganrog, a key manufacturer of military aircraft, including amphibious seaplanes, and the rare A-50 AWACS spy plane, was reportedly hit. Telegram news channels captured images showing fires breaking out on runways and on aircraft, though Ukrainian authorities have not officially confirmed damage to the facility. Rostov Governor Yuri Slyuser reported that the strikes caused damage to homes, a warehouse, and a gas pipeline, with 3 people killed and 8 injured. Krasnodar Krai Governor Veniamin Kondratyev described the attack as one of the longest and most massive the region had experienced, reporting injuries to 6 civilians and damage to at least 20 homes. Analysts noted that one of the drones struck a high-rise building just 700 meters from a Russian military unit housing S-400 air defense systems, highlighting the precision of Ukraine's strikes. Russia claimed to have shot down 249 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 76 over Krasnodar Krai and 16 over Rostov Oblast. But the scale of the operation underscored Ukraine's capability to target deep into Russian territory. The attacks were a clear message. Ukraine can retaliate swiftly and strike strategic military infrastructure, even while under direct assault at home. This brutal exchange of strikes, Russia pounding Kyiv, Ukraine hitting key military facilities inside Russia, marked a pivotal escalation in the war. It demonstrated not only the intensity of the conflict on the battlefield, but also how military operations are now directly tied to ongoing diplomatic negotiations, creating enormous pressure on all sides. While missiles and drones tore across Ukraine and Russia, diplomats were racing against the clock in Geneva, working on a plan that could decide the future of the war. On November 24, 2025, US and Ukrainian negotiators announced an updated and refined peace framework, signaling what they described as highly productive discussions. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the talks as making a tremendous amount of progress in narrowing open items from the original 28-point US-backed plan. However, he was careful to note that there is still some work to be done before a final agreement could be presented to Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky echoed the cautious optimism, telling the Swedish parliament it was a critical moment for Ukraine. He warned, Putin wants legal recognition for what he has stolen, to break the principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty. That's the main problem. Despite the progress, the negotiations remained deeply sensitive. The leaked draft of the US-backed plan contained controversial provisions, including Ukraine agreeing to withdraw troops from parts of eastern Donetsk, international recognition of de facto Russian control of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, a reduction in Ukraine's military to 600,000 personnel, Ukraine pledging not to seek NATO membership, instead receiving unspecified, reliable security guarantees. Russia's reintegration into the global economy, including the possibility of returning to the G7. Zelensky stressed that Ukraine had managed to keep sensitive points, such as the release of all Ukrainian prisoners of war, on the table. He said, "There is still more to do to achieve real peace." Rubio, meanwhile, confirmed that while much had been resolved, any final agreement would have to be agreed by the Ukrainian and US presidents before it could be put to Russia. The stakes were enormous. Progress in Geneva could set the stage for a diplomatic breakthrough, but the leaked plans sparked alarm in Kyiv and across Europe, where officials feared it favored Russia too heavily. Finnish President Alexander Stubb acknowledged the steps forward while noting, "The negotiations were a step forward, but there are still major issues which remain to be resolved." European Council President Antonio Costa also emphasized the importance of a united and coordinated EU position in securing a favorable outcome for Ukraine and Europe. Even US President Donald Trump weighed in, publicly criticizing Ukraine for showing zero gratitude for American peace efforts. The remarks added pressure on Kyiv in the middle of critical negotiations, highlighting the complex interplay between military escalation, diplomacy, and international public opinion. As Geneva negotiations continued, European leaders quietly drafted their own plan, a counter-proposal designed to protect Ukraine's interests and prevent a settlement that heavily favored Russia. On November 24, 2025, top Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov publicly dismissed the European plan as completely unconstructive. "It does not suit us." The European plan, reportedly drafted by the UK, France, and Germany, included critical concessions for Ukraine, raising the Ukrainian military limit from 600,000 to 800,000 troops, removing the requirement to cede additional territory in Donbass, calling for a ceasefire along the current front lines, securing US security guarantees for Ukraine, mirroring NATO's Article 5. For Kyiv and its European allies, this plan represented a more balanced approach, one that recognized the realities on the ground while protecting Ukraine's sovereignty. But Moscow's response was swift and unequivocal. Ushakov's rejection underscored a central truth of the war's diplomatic dimension. Russia will not accept any settlement that strengthens Ukraine or constrains its territorial ambitions. At the same time, he acknowledged that many aspects of the US plan, which had already been discussed during a summit in Alaska, are acceptable to Moscow. This instant rejection of Europe's counter-proposal revealed the Kremlin's strategic preference: accept the plan that grants Russia maximum advantage, reject any alternative that empowers Kyiv. It also highlighted the growing tension between Washington and its European allies, who were increasingly concerned that the US-backed draft could undermine European security and Ukraine's sovereignty. By late November 2025, the war had evolved into a high-stakes diplomatic showdown. On one side, Russia was intensifying its attacks on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. On the other, Ukraine was retaliating with precision strikes deep inside Russian territory. And above it all, diplomats in Geneva and capitals across Europe and Washington were racing to negotiate a peace framework before the violence escalated further. Three major visions were competing to shape the outcome. The US-backed 28-point plan, demanding significant concessions from Ukraine. The European counter-proposal, softening restrictions on Ukraine and offering more security guarantees. Ukraine's own conditions, insisting on preserving its territorial integrity, military strength, and the release of all prisoners of war. European leaders warned that any decision falling in the remit of EU or NATO will be discussed and decided by EU and NATO members in a separate track, as Finnish President Alexander Stubb emphasized. European Council President Antonio Costa added, "A united and coordinated EU position is key in ensuring a good outcome of peace negotiations for Ukraine and for Europe." The simultaneous escalation on the battlefield and the negotiation table created a unique geopolitical pressure point. Every missile and drone strike was not only a military act, but also a message to diplomats. Ukraine can retaliate, defend its sovereignty, and influence the terms of any peace. The Kremlin, meanwhile, watched developments with a clear strategic calculation. It rejected Europe's plan as completely unconstructive, signaling that Russia will accept only a settlement that maximizes its gains. At the same time, leaked drafts of the US-backed plan indicated significant concessions demanded of Kyiv, raising the stakes for Zelensky and his team. While the diplomatic chess game unfolded in Geneva, US President Donald Trump inserted himself directly into the negotiations, publicly applying pressure on Ukraine at a critical moment. On November 23, 2025, Trump accused Kyiv of showing zero gratitude for American efforts to end the war. This was no casual remark. Trump's criticism was a calculated negotiation tactic aimed at influencing both Ukraine's leadership and the broader diplomatic process. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the Geneva talks as highly productive and reported tremendous progress. Yet Trump's public criticism added pressure, creating a tense dynamic between the battlefield, the negotiation table, and global public perception. For Ukraine, the challenge was immediate. President Zelensky had to respond in a way that maintained credibility with the US, reassured European allies, and preserved domestic support, all while Russian missiles were raining down on Kyiv. As the Geneva talks unfolded, cracks appeared in the US-Ukraine alliance. Leaked details of the US-backed 28-point plan revealed provisions many in Kyiv and Europe saw as heavily favorable to Russia, including territorial concessions in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, limits on Ukraine's military, and restrictions on NATO membership. President Volodymyr Zelensky faced a hard choice: accept the plan and risk sovereignty, or reject it and risk alienating a key ally, while Russian missiles and drones continued to strike Ukrainian cities. The situation escalated when US President Donald Trump accused Kyiv of showing zero gratitude for American peace efforts. To counter this pressure and demonstrate international support, Zelensky launched a rapid diplomatic campaign. On November 24, 2025, he publicly thanked 13 world leaders within an hour, writing, "Thank you for your support," including leaders such as Estonia's Kristen Michel, Sweden's Ulf Kristersson, and Luxembourg's Luc Frieden. The move reaffirmed Ukraine's ties with European allies, countered Trump's criticism, and strengthened Kyiv's negotiating position. At the same time, Ukrainian drones struck deep into Russia, hitting critical infrastructure like the Burev Aircraft Company, signaling that Ukraine could defend itself while engaging diplomatically. The episode highlighted a broader reality. Allied interests can diverge under war stress, with the US seeking rapid peace, Ukraine safeguarding sovereignty, and Europe pushing for balance. By publicly thanking European leaders, Zelensky showed that Ukraine is a reliable partner, capable of combining military resilience with strategic diplomacy, even under extreme pressure. The war in Ukraine is no longer just fought on the battlefield, it's being waged in courtrooms, negotiation tables, and global perception. Russia's missile attacks, Ukraine's retaliatory strikes, US-backed peace plans, and Europe's counter-proposals all collide in a high-stakes game with the world watching. As Zelensky thinks his allies' intentions simmer between Kyiv and Washington, one thing is clear: every strike, every negotiation, and every statement matters. The next moves will not just shape Ukraine's future, but the balance of power across Europe, and the world is paying close attention.